All right, welcome to the personal statement workshop. We're going to talk about writing personal statements. We are going to start with a little workshopping exercise, and I definitely recommend going through this before you listen to the rest of the presentation for folks at home. For folks here, I definitely recommend doing all of these exercises just as an opportunity to start brainstorming. So we do this workshop early. We do it in November, even though you aren't applying until June in most cases, because we want you to take the time to really think about your personal statement. It's not something that you're just going to come up with and write in a month. You really want to start by thinking about, how do I want to show myself or market myself or highlight myself to the admissions committees? Who do I want to describe myself to the schools as? How do I want them to see me as an individual? And then how do I gather my experiences to do that? And I always say we have this in November, so that in Thanksgiving, when you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table with your people, you can say, hey, guess what? I am writing my personal statement. What do you guys think I should put in it? And I always say that and kind of laugh, but I actually mean it, because who knows you better than the people that you spend Thanksgiving with, whether that's your family or your friends, or whomever. So, let's get started with the workshopping piece. Whoops. So what we're going to start out with is about a 15-minute exercise. And 15 minutes is long to do this, but it's long intentionally. What we're going to do is just take 15 minutes to write, and you're just going to write about everything that you see as, number one, something that you're proud of. So all the things that you've accomplished during your college career and potentially before then that you're really proud of, things that you think are unique about you, things that you've achieved that you put a lot of work into that were hard to do, things that you think are really characteristic of who you are. So we're going to go until 12:20, and we're gonna write until 12:20. For folks at home listening to this, I'm going to pause the recording, but still do the exercise. So for folks at home, spend 20 minutes, 15 minutes just thinking, writing. So I'll pause and stop talking. Okay, so that was 15 minutes. If you guys are still writing, then you can, well, you can do a little more writing later. Definitely feel like you can keep working on that. For a lot of people, that's a long time to write. It's meant to be a long time to write because it's meant to kind of help you think about those things that maybe pop up in the last few minutes after you've written down all of the obvious things. Then you start to remember things like, oh, I did that a while ago. So definitely feel free to keep adding to this. What we're going to do next, though, we're going to do, taking what you've written down already, we're going to look at it and do a little concept mapping. So basically what you want to do is you want to look through everything that you've written down, circle important concepts, things that really pop out at you as like, oh, you know what, this is something that really matters to me. This is something that's really important to me, important part of my undergraduate experience. This is something that I really would want the schools to know about me. Label common themes. So you're going to circle things, you're going to put words to it and label things, and then you're going to connect related concepts with lines and label those lines. And those lines, the labels that you put on those lines are going to be themes, and those themes are going to be kind of important because that's what you're going to start thinking about as we go into our next steps, is like, what's a theme that I want to run through my personal statement. So I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes. to just look through everything you've written down here and think about what's really important to me out of all the things that I've written down. What are some of the things that I feel like I'm most proud of, are most unique, are most sort of central to who I am as a person? Circle those and do some connecting of those themes and labeling of those arrows. So we're going to have about 5 minutes here to do that. So I'm going to pause the tape and I'll give everybody a little bit of time to do that. Okay, so that's 5 minutes. Hopefully, you guys all found some themes and some kind of important concepts and labels for your lines that you really felt like, oh, this kind of sticks out as something that might become a theme of my personal statement. So now I'm just going to talk here for the next 20-25 minutes about how to take these ideas that you've put down on paper and think about them as a personal statement or bring them to a point where they're a personal statement. So you really want to next take these ideas and analyze them a little bit. So what are your major themes and what are those labels on those lines, and can you build a personal statement around those? So what you really want to get from your personal statement, or what you want to give your audience, and your audience is the admissions committees, um, a statement that shows who you are, why you want to be a doctor, whether that's a dentist, a physician, a veterinarian, and how are you qualified, right? That's what you want to get across as a part of your personal statement. If you don't answer those three questions, you haven't met the objectives of the personal statement. So, another way that you also want to look at the personal statement is you want to imagine that you have 5 minutes to talk directly to the admissions committee, and you want to think about, okay, if I was just sitting down with an admissions person and speaking to them directly, what would I say? Because a personal statement really is your chance to talk directly to admissions. Everything else in the application is kind of defined by questions and kind of defined by the scope of what the application asks. This is your one place to decide what you want to tell them. So this is your one chance to say, okay, I want to talk about X, I want to talk about Y. So you really want to think about, how do I want to frame this one piece of the application? Remember, a personal statement has one goal, and that's to make the reader want to get to know you better. And how do they do that? They invite you to an interview. It's not to be cathartic. It's not to share, your beliefs and values, or tell them why the healthcare system is wrong or bad. It's to entice them to invite you to campus for an interview. So you really have to keep that in mind. Is this going to make somebody think, oh, this person is really interesting, I'd like to talk to them more? And interesting does not mean that you have to be unique or different. Interesting means that you have to be yourself so they can understand who you are as an individual. So what a personal statement should not be, um, it should not be generic, and by that we mean, um, your personal statement should not be something that anybody else could have written. It should have enough detail in it that it would only be a personal statement about you. So you want to have enough about you as an individual in it that they get a sense of who you are. And including quotes is a part of that. The personal statement shouldn't include quotes. You may have a particular quote from Gandhi or Atul Gawande or Martin Luther King that really speaks to you and talks about kind of who you want to be as a doctor, really makes you think about things. And that's great. But instead of including that in your personal statement, think about why that quote speaks to you and talk about that in your personal statement. Um, Atul Gawande has already gotten into medical school, so he doesn't need to write anything for a personal statement. They have read all of the quotes before. They know what Gandhi said. So really focus on what you have to say, and what you want to tell them for your personal statement. Sometimes people just can't resist the urge to put that quote in there. Start with a quote in there, write what you have to say, and at the end, take that quote out and delete it before you send it. In terms of focusing on the negative, there are sometimes reasons that people have that make them want to go to medical school that started with something negative. They had a personal experience, for example, in healthcare. A family member had a personal experience and they think the system should be better than this. It's fine to talk about that, but really what you want to focus on is, how does this inspire me? How does this drive me to be a physician? How am I going to make a difference in the system based on this experience? You also um, may have something that you feel like you need to address. Maybe you have a hole in your application. You took a personal leave for a semester. You have a semester with really bad grades. You failed a course that they're going to be like, what's that about? You probably want to mention that in your personal statement. Don't focus on the negative. Again, if you started out your freshman year and did really poorly in your classes, and I'm not talking about C's poorly, I'm talking about, your first semester, you withdrew from 2 classes and failed one. You probably want to talk about that. Don't focus on, oh, the bad. Focus on, well, this is what I learned from it. This happened, one sentence, and here's how it's going to make me a better student. Here's how I became more resilient. Here's what I took away from that, that's made me stronger. You're not going to cover everything that you can possibly talk about yourself. You're only going to cover enough to make them want to get to know you better. You can't possibly talk about everything about yourself because you're too complex and this is a page and a half. So you're going to have to pick and choose. You don't want things to be open to misinterpretation. And what does that mean? Um, you want the reader to be able to understand your motivations for medicine. You don't want them to wonder, well, is this person putting in, do they have negative thoughts about medicine? You want it to be really clear that you think positively about the field of medicine because that's what you're applying for. You want them to understand um, that, you know, what you did in a current role. You don't want there to be any areas of lack of clarity. So I guess when you talk about don't try and cover everything, you have to cover a topic in full when you're putting together your personal statement. So there has to be closure about it. So you're not going to go into complete depth because you're going to go on campus and talk to them in an interview. You're not going to tell them, you want to come across in terms of statements about your awesomeness. Um, it's really tricky because you want to come across as humble. You don't want to already sound like an arrogant doctor. At the same time, you don't want to come across as, whoops, sorry here. You don't want to come across as not knowing your own value. And so it is a fine line. So you want to talk about your experiences and talk about who you are. I think a really important thing with that is not to use the word I too much. So if you use the word I, sometimes that can come across as arrogant when it's not really meant to be. And then in terms of leaving the ultimate question unanswered, why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to do this? If they read your personal statement and it doesn't answer that question, then you're not going to be invited for an interview. They want to know why you want to do this. So sensitive information, and how do you decide if if you should include it? A lot of people do have information that is kind of personal and sensitive, and that can be a lot of different things. It can be about a health condition. It can be something about your family, either some difficulty that your family has gone through, maybe something that was a medical challenge, maybe it was a financial challenge, maybe it was a challenge with your family dynamic when you were growing up. Um, maybe you didn't have both parents around, and something to do with how that impacted you. Um, Sometimes you didn't have a lot of, I said a lot of money. Sometimes it's more something like sexual orientation, or uh, I don't know, something about where you're from. Any variety of things. Sometimes you kind of feel like, oh, this is kind of private and personal. Should I put it in my application? Does it not belong in my application? Usually, if you are going to include it, the place that it goes is in your personal statement. And what I would say on that is you really want to ask yourself, is it an important part of your journey? Is this part of why you're applying to this program? Is this why you're thinking you want to go to medical school? You had a health condition and you were in the hospital and you were really inspired by the doctors, or conversely, you didn't have a really good experience with the doctors and you kind of feel like, I want to help make the system better. I want to help people who are like me. um, that's a good reason to include it. You had a medical condition and it really has nothing to do with why you want to be a doctor. Then you don't have to include it. It is kind of important that you realize that whoever reads your application is going to be different from you. And so the way that you frame what you talk about with sensitive information, you have to think about it from all ranges of perspectives. So some people who read the application are going to be second year medical students, right? Because the medical students help with the application, all the way through folks who are faculty who are about to retire. So a wide age range of people. Um, you have higher education professionals, so people like myself who work at the college, um, who may not have a science background. At the same time, you have faculty reading them, you have physicians reading them, so you have people with a wide range of medical experience and a wide depth of knowledge about the field. So you want to also kind of target information knowing you have a wide range of readers there. And then what's really important with sensitive information is you're not tossing it out there just to kind of be like, oh, hey, take me because of this. You really want to frame the narrative around that sensitive information so that you can show, this is how I've grown because of this. This is how it's going to make me a better doctor. So this is, you know, because I have this experience, I know it's going to help me in caring for other people. So, a few things about a personal statement. Again, a personal statement needs to be personal. It should be something that only you could write. And a lot of the time, when you look at sample personal statements, if you look at them online, either there'll be somebody who's had some ridiculous life experience, they, climbed Mount Everest or whatever, um, or they had, no life, they're just a sort of quote unquote regular everyday person. But, they grew up in the suburbs. They had two loving parents and they like science and they like people. So they want to be a doctor. And so some of the things that you read, you're like, well, okay, I have not climbed Mount Everest with my sister on my back. So that's not going to work as a personal statement. And then when you look at the other ones, sometimes you'll see they'll try and be a little flashy or kitschy, or try and grab people's attention, with these big, like, bam, light shined on the empty room, or I don't know, something like that. I am not a fan of um, personal statements that are like that have some fancy, flashy opening. I think you're better off just telling your story, and don't try and start your narrative with something that's like an attention grabber, because I think what grabs people's attention is a genuine, honest narrative about who you are as an individual. So, what most people will do with a personal statement, the first paragraph, they'll share a story of who they are, and you do want that to be personal. So, you want to tell a story that in some way allows people to relate to who you are and see you as an individual, and understand a little bit about what matters to you. So, whether you talk about a clinical experience or you talk about some life experience you have, you want to talk about it in enough detail so that people understand the experience, but don't be, trying to grab their attention in some way that isn't genuine. Just be genuine and tell the story. Be direct, be active in your language, be clear. Um, so you want to really try and put those things into your narrative as opposed to trying to make things flashy when you really don't need to. What you really just need to do is share who you are. In terms of what follows that first paragraph, so most personal statements are like 5 paragraphs. The first paragraph kind of shares a little bit about who you are as an individual, maybe shares a story that gives the reader a little bit of a sense of, okay, this is who this person is, a little bit of a sense of, okay, this is why they like people, this is why they like science, this is why they want to be a physician. And then the 3 paragraphs in the middle talk about more concrete examples of things that you've done, your research, your service, your clinical experience, if you have some experience that is really related to medicine that kind of exemplifies who you are. And then the end, you really want to tie things up and solidify that question, why do you want to be a doctor? Um, and ties all the pieces together in the end. And all of those are going to follow a central theme, so there should be a thread that runs through it, that people can sort of follow along and see, maybe that theme is something really um, small theme, like something to do with your family. And so it's a really, you know, s- really tight theme, or something to do with maybe somebody in your family has a healthcare challenge and you talk about their illness and then research you did based on that same sort of illness, or something. Sometimes maybe it's something a little bit larger, like you really enjoy being around people and you talk a little bit about the ways that you've worked with people. So kind of think about, how did those lines connect. And then finally, one really important thing is you want to make sure you don't have any errors in your personal statement. Once you submit your application, you can't change it. And so if something goes in with an error, it's staying with an error. People have been accepted with errors in their application, or a typo. It's not like it's a kiss of death or anything, but you'll be sitting there looking at it and you'll be sad that it's there. What we recommend, you're going to have to write a lot of essays for your secondary apps. So really start now doing a little bit of brainstorming. You can do it on your computer. Just do a lot of like free writing. Put together a writing schedule. Just give yourself a half hour a night. Write about yourself. Write about um, things that you think you might want to put in your personal statement. Write a paragraph a night. Um, and just develop themes and develop ideas. If you develop something and then you wind up not using it, don't throw it away. Just put it someplace, like essay ideas, have a folder of them, because what will happen is once you start writing those secondaries, you can come back to that and be like, oh, actually, I didn't use this in my personal statement, but this really answers the question, why am I unique? Or why do I want to go to this school? So any time that you spend writing is not going to be a waste of time. You're going to start developing themes and ideas that you start to see later on. Also, the time that you spend writing, really helps you when you get to interviews because you've really thought about this stuff. And it's so important when you get to those interviews that you've really spent a lot of time thinking about what are the experiences I've had? Why do I want to do this? It's really critical. So spending that time now is going to help you later. Um, Errors. Yes. So here we are. Errors are the kiss of death. They say I couldn't bother to put the time into this, so I don't really want to be a doctor. This should look like it's the most important thing in the world. I can tell you, I have seen people who have a typo in their application and they still got in. But if your application is not, if it looks like you didn't care enough to spell check, they're not going to care enough to read it. So really put the time in to make sure that the application is really as good as possible. That means proofreading, and it also means asking other people. And that is the last thing that I recommend is seeking feedback. You really need to seek feedback from other people. And in a variety of ways. So you want to ask people who know you really well to read your personal statement and see, you know, is this really who I am? Those people around your Thanksgiving table who know you so well, is this who you see me as? Your friends, your parents? Like, does this describe me? Is this the most salient parts of who I am? Because that's what you want your personal statement to be. Then people who don't know you, those are good people to have read it also. And just have them say, who do you get a sense of, do you get a sense of who I am from this personal statement? One exercise you could do is have somebody who doesn't know you really well read it, and just next to each paragraph, write a couple words of, okay, who is this? Like, how do I get a sense of this person from this paragraph? So you write a couple words there, and then when they're finished, you'll have what, 5 paragraphs, so 10 words, and think about, is this how I want to portray myself as an applicant using those 10 words? If it's not, you go back to the drawing board. So you want to make some tweaks to make sure that the overall impression that people take away is the impression that you want to give the reader. I would also recommend having your physician mentor look over the personal statement and giving you feedback on it, right? At one point, they were applying to medical school. Your dental mentor, look it over, the podiatrist who you've shadowed. So whoever it is who's in your field, who you've spent time with, have them look it over. They work in the field that you're applying for. Do they think this is a really good reason to want to be a doctor? So mentors are definitely good people to have look it over. And then finally, the pre-health program is going to look it over when we do your committee letter interview. We're happy to look it over if you're like, I don't know, am I going in the right direction? It's not necessarily the best idea to have us read like 10 versions, because if we do that, then we don't read it and get the same impression that the admissions committees get. And because we'll sort of have the last version in our mind. And so you can kind of get into this perspective of, oh, I know what they meant because I read it in the last version. So, definitely check in with us. We're not the best person to read, 10 versions of it. And finally, you will send, if you send this out to 10 different people, you're probably going to get 10 different bits of feedback, and all of them may conflict. Somebody may love a paragraph and somebody else may say, oh, you should totally change that paragraph. In the end, it's your personal statement and you get to decide how you want to portray yourself to the school. So, definitely take the time and really think about that and what's your overarching message that you want to give admissions. So that's the overall picture. I don't know if anybody has questions about it. If you do have questions for folks who are on the chat live now, you can type them into the chat box. Anyone? Okay, so I'm going to pause or end the recording. So thanks for listening to folks at home. If anybody on the chat has questions, definitely feel free to type them in. And if you do have questions at home, definitely feel free to send us an email.